So, it's kinda wild that in a few months, the Nintendo Switch is going to be 7 years old. And what's even more wild is its 6th year may have been the best of its entire lifespan. There were so many bangers, both in terms of quantity and quality, spanning so many different genres, and I can't have possibly played all of them. I'm gonna leave some games off. But I played a lot this year, and it was really tough to just narrow it down to 21. There were so many great games that were left off this list. But anyway, without further ado, let's count down my personal favorite, 21 favorite Nintendo Switch games released in 2023. Don't blame the other GVG guys, this is just my stuff. They probably hate some of the stuff I put on here too. But oh well, let's do it! And kicking off the list at number 21 is Advance Wars. And I meant it when I said there were a bunch of games I was considering for the list that didn't quite make it, because Dokapon Kingdom was very close and you guys chose Advance Wars for me, so thank you for that. It had been 15 years since the last Advance Wars on DS, and thankfully, Way Forward were able to bring it back. Reboot Camp is a compilation of 1 and 2, trading the sprites of the GBA original for a more modern 3D look. Whether you prefer it is a matter of preference, but man, I'm just so happy that Advance Wars is back. And this is the first time I've ever played it multiplayer because this version has online play. Characters now have voices, the music's been redone, there's a great animated intro. This is just a really good remake of Advance Wars and something I'm so glad finally happened. And hopefully, Way Forward have the keys to the franchise for making more Advance Wars games. Please! At number 20, we have A Space for the Unbound, probably the best looking game on this list. This can be such a cozy game, just exploring this Indonesian town with culture unlike many other video games. It's just stunning to look at and get to know, but there is a darker and more twisted side to it, as you'll be exploring the psyche of many of the residents here, solving their problems and getting to know exactly what they're thinking deep down. And this enhances both sides of the game, as you get to know more about the residents just on a one-on-one basis, while also making just exploring the town even more homely and cozier. Now, this is very much a narrative-driven game, there's not exactly combat or anything like that to deal with, but it still tells a story that could only be done via video games. And at number 19, we have Fire Emblem Engage. And remember, just because it's low on the list does not mean it's bad. These are still incredible games, and in a lesser year, this would be near the top. Engage both tells its own story with unique characters, as well as offering heaps of fan service with these rings, which contain past characters from the series. It's a game that loses much of the social side of Three Houses, although it is there to some extent, and puts more of the energy into the actual strategy gameplay itself, and in that regard, it can be much more clever than Three Houses. There's a bunch of refinements to gameplay and little tweaks that do shake things up for the better, but taken as a whole, it definitely didn't have the impact of Three Houses. But that's fine, this is a different game doing different things, and succeeding in doing those things differently. At number 18, we have WarioWare Move It, a sequel to one of my favorite games on Wii. Smooth moves were so intuitive and fast and just clever, and Move It encompasses much of that DNA. It goes a bit further though to essentially make a smooth moves with Motion Plus. A lot of the micro games are much more involved and ask more of the player, and there's even some that use the pesky little IR camera. The game also wants you to dig out your wrist straps. Do you remember where they are? Because it's important, you can't just pretend that you have them. And it all results in a WarioWare game that is one of the best in the series. I think it's just behind Smooth Moves and Gold. Just like Fire Emblem, in a lesser year, this will be right near the top of the list, but there's just been so many good games on the Switch this year. At number 17, we have Persona 5 Tactica. Tactica brings us back to the familiar Gang of the Phantom Thieves for another original adventure. Only this time trading the traditional turn-based RPG combat for a full-on strategy game. A lot of the mechanics are carried over though. I mean, the UI looks extremely familiar, and you can get things like a one more turn if you knock them outside of cover. Persona's just a really good match for this style, and while the story itself may not be anything too crazy, it's just nice being back with this gang again. And the music is absolutely rocking. At number 16, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Future Redeemed. Can DLC be on this list? Well, Future Redeemed is basically a standalone game. It even lasts longer than most standalone games. Look, I adored the original Xenoblade 3, but it definitely lacked that layer bringing the whole franchise together. I mean, we had characters, but the whole series lore wasn't really touched upon, and Future Redeemed is basically that. Shulk is back as an adult, which is so cool to see, and Rex is back. Good lord! While there is a great deal for those who have played through the entire series, it does also tell its own story. In fact, despite Rex and Shulk being here, this is very much Matthew's story, a brand new character, and I love him!
Man, I'm freezing my balls off!
You sure are, Matthew. This really does feel like a swan song for Xenoblade, and we even revisit Colony 9, complete with the music both for battles and the actual environments themselves. Monolith Soft with Torna and now Future Redeemed have set such a high quality for expansions, and I want this in a box so badly. I've got Torna in a box, sell me Future Redeemed in a box. Do it, now! It's not too late, it's never too late. At number 15, we have Bayonetta Origins, Cereza, and the Lost Demon. And once the Switch is said and done, this will probably be on a bunch of hidden gems lists. This doesn't have a whole lot to do with the core Bayonetta from a gameplay perspective, and instead focuses more on telling a fairy tale story. I definitely don't play Bayonetta for the story, in fact that's probably the weakest part of this series. But here, they managed to make it delightful and charming, and the visual style is so cool too. This is more of a narrative puzzler. I mean, there is combat, but it's very automated. Basically, Cereza herself can't actually attack, instead she freezes enemies, while her demon with the right stick can attack them with Zener. So there's definitely not a bunch of combos and different moves to use, but it's also not the focus this time around. It's a very unique game, and I hope Platinum Games get to make more games outside their comfort zone, just like this one. At number 14, we have Master Detective Archives, Raincode, the successor to Danganronpa. Now, outside of solving murders, which is familiar, and the character designs, which are very familiar, there aren't that many similarities. Raincode is a much larger game in scope than Danganronpa. Instead of exploring the same area for the entire game, it's pretty expansive. There's a bunch of different areas to explore, and a bunch of one-off areas too. And you're doing a lot more first-hand this time in full 3D. And the gameplay and pacing loop isn't quite as predictable either, often changing quite a bit between each murder. It doesn't seem to have landed the same iconic status as Danganronpa, but please give it a go. In many ways, I think it's better than that series. It's definitely more ambitious. And at number 13, we have Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince. Finally, Dragon Quest Monsters is back in the West, and I adored this game. It's got its issues from a technical perspective, looking more like an HD PS2 game and not exactly running well either, but the core gameplay loop is so addictive. The monster designs in Dragon Quest are among the best in the entire industry, and just discovering them, getting them on your team, and then going back to synthesize them by putting two monsters together to make another monster has so much depth to it. And on top of that, this isn't really a spin-off. It's more of a companion game to Dragon Quest IV, taking place simultaneously but starring the antagonist of that game. It goes to really cool places and has such great twists. And even if you've not played Dragon Quest IV, the story it tells is still of its own and is worth experiencing. At number 12, we have Sea of Stars. And this has been said a few times, but if this were any other year, this would probably be like number 1. But man, this year didn't stop. Sea of Stars is a love letter to pretty much all my favorite JRPGs. There's of course a bunch of Chrono Trigger, but there's also timed commands like Mario RPG where pressing a button before an attack lands either keeps it going or makes it more powerful. And there's so many more things in here, like Golden Sun's also in there somewhat. But more than any influence, I think the best part of Sea of Stars is what it does of its own. The world, the characters, the music, it's all best of class for this genre. And while I think the writing itself could have been improved, it still left such a huge impact on me. You can tell the developers were very proud of what they were making, and they should be. At number 11, we have Super Mario RPG, possibly one of my favorite remakes ever made. A lot goes into remaking a classic game. We remember every last detail, so when something isn't quite right or feels a bit different, it definitely stands out. And there have been many remakes over the years that personally I just don't jive with because they don't quite respect the core legacy of why I loved the original. And that's not this! Mario RPG does everything so well. It essentially takes that pre-rendered look of the original and just renders it in real time. It's absolutely crazy how far visuals have gotten, but Mario RPG is just such a delightful looking game, and it harkens back to that era of Nintendo. plenty of Mario characters and enemies haven't looked like this for decades, and then there's also brand new designs that we haven't seen in years, just remade so carefully. It's the kind of Mario game that, up until now, they just stopped making, so the fact that it's returned is so important for the future of Mario. But more than that, the game itself is just so damn special. At number 10, we have Theatrhythm Final Bar Line, and I'm not kidding when I say that this was a dream game. The Duo on 3DS was some of the best games on that system, just a big old love letter to Final Fantasy, and I didn't think it could be done anywhere else, but they did it! Final Bar Line goes even further. The core identity is still here, but there's so much more to this game, so many more songs, even some crossovers like Nier, and Saga, and Secret of Mana, and Chrono Trigger, and The World Ends With You, and Bravely Default. It's just a pure celebration of some of gaming's best music. And there's so much replayability too, whether it's just trying to master all the songs or going online to compete. This is probably the best rhythm game of this generation, so don't overlook Final Bar Line. It is definitely worth your time. At number 9, we have Cocoon, the next game by the developers of Limbo and Inside. Unlike those two, which were side-scrollers, Cocoon lets you move in any direction you damn want. The design philosophies of the previous games are still very much here. It doesn't say a single word, there's not a single line of dialogue or a tutorial, there's no HUD, it's just pure, clean, and led by you. There's so many clever puzzles that twist and re-innovate themselves, and they've even managed to do boss fights to some extent, but if you loved Limbo or Inside, you are gonna adore this. At number 8, we have Metroid Prime Remastered. Now, Mario RPG remade a classic in basically the best way it can, and Metroid Prime Remastered took what was already one of the best looking GameCube games, and somehow made one of the best looking Switch games. It's still the same game for the most part, although now we can play with dual sticks or motion controls if you want to, like the Wii version, but the main scheme is dual sticks, which is a pretty big change. But man, it looks so good. Every texture is different, the lighting has been completely overhauled, and now, when you look up in the rain when you first land on Talon 4, the droplets fall down your arm cannon. That is such a cool touch. I don't know how many times in my life I've replayed Metroid Prime 1, but it was still such a joy to go to every area just to see how it looks now, going around every corner just to appreciate the new work done to the surrounding landscapes. Metroid Prime already had a timeless art style, but they've cemented it as something that looks gorgeous in this day and age. Like, this could be a PlayStation 5 game and I'd still think it looks great. And also, they've eliminated the need to wait by a door for things to load. They just load instantly now, which is cool. At number 7, there is another remake, being Star Ocean: The Second Story R. This is kind of an HD 2D game, but not really. They've basically remade the entire game in full 3D. Apart from the character models are kind of like 32-bit looking sprites. Star Ocean 2 is a very special game and one of my favorite RPGs of all time. It's not overly long either, but there's such great pacing to it. It's basically a sci-fi meets fantasy setting, where your main character comes from an advanced civilization on Earth, but finds himself on a much more fantasy planet by mistake. Combat's real-time with new layers that weren't in the PS1 version, like being able to break enemies by doing a bunch of combos with your party members. They had already remade Star Ocean 2 on the PSP, so this is the second remake of that game, and I think they finally perfected what this game is. It was already fantastic in any version, but this truly is the definitive way to play Star Ocean 2, the best version of a classic game. At number 6 is Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and man, I adored this game. I've let my feelings be known for a while that 2D Mario, for a very long time, has been pretty damn boring. Like, all the new series games are good, but they're so safe that it's just dull to play. Wonder, though, is exactly what I wanted 2D Mario to be. It's so expressive, it's got new ideas every single time the screen scrolls, with new enemies, new gimmicks, and then the Wonder Flowers take all this freshness and just do whatever the hell they want. Mario can become a jelly ball. It can go from being a 2D side-scroller to being a full-on top-down game. Every single level in this game is fantastic, and then there's badges that add new abilities, which makes it really replayable to just return to other levels with different powers. And then there's online play where you can race against your friends, or even help strangers, which is one of the best elements of this game, just playing online with people you don't know, and aiding them to find star coins or whatever else. If there were just a bit more challenge, I think this would be my favorite 2D Mario ever. At number 5, we have Ghost Trick, which is pretty much just a raw port. I would usually not just put ports in a best game of the year list, especially when there's so many other games released this year that are worthy of being shouted out, but Ghost Trick deserves everything. I truly believe this is one of the greatest video games ever made, and not enough people have played it. If I weren't a coward, I'd put it at number 1, because it is probably the best game released this year. Everything is essentially perfect. It's one of the best stories ever told in a video game. The visuals are out of this world. These were made for the DS, but they still look super clean in HD. The soundtrack is remarkable, and the gameplay is in such a perfect marriage with the narrative. You are dead in this game, and you've got to possess objects to get around, like a point-and-click adventure almost. But every single element is just in a perfect balance. Ghost Trick, play it now, Missile. At number 4, we have Pikmin 4. Pikmin 4 has claimed to be in development for a very long time, and once you play it, I think you can just go, yeah, it makes sense why this game took so long. This is the biggest and most ambitious Pikmin game by a mile. They've moved the camera behind you, so it's now in third person, which gives you much more of a tangible feeling to the world. Everything just looks stunning. It's very easy to forget that the Switch is like a 7-year-old system when playing Pikmin 4. And when everything finally clicks, the feeling of efficiency is unlike anything else. Just knowing which Pikmin should go where, going underwater with the blue ones, using the yellow ones to get electric gates, using the flying ones, it all just feels like second nature by the end. This is probably my favorite RTS ever made, and while I think the story is maybe a bit on the easy side, when you finish the game, it goes, ha! That isn't even the beginning, and the post-game will truly test your abilities, and that's where Pikmin 4 really makes the statement that it deserved to be in development all this time. At number 3, we have F-Zero 99. I am deadly serious, I adore this game so much. I don't even love the original Super Nintendo F-Zero. My love for the series really starts with X, but F-Zero 99 is not the Super Nintendo F-Zero. It looks like it, I mean it's wearing its skin, but mechanically, these are very different games. This in fact is far more like F-Zero X. And F-Zero is just such a perfect match for a 99-player death race battler. Because there's so many players, like no matter how well you do, there's always that one more game nature. Like if you come 50th, you've beat 50 other people. Maybe you've got a chance of beating more. Try again. If you come in the top 10, maybe you've got a chance of winning. Try again. If you come first, you might think, well, I'm the best and I can do it again, and then you probably don't do it again. There's also a brilliant layer of luck, as while the most skilled players can quite comfortably stay in the lead for most of the race, those a bit further behind can collect little orbs which lead them to the Sky Road. This is faster and it bypasses turns, and skillful use of this can quite easily net you a win. In my opinion, it's the best multiplayer game of the entire year, and I love the Grand Prix so much too. Just consecutive races that are slowly dwindling off the player count, and it feels so good when you've won like 4 races in a row, and you're just one of the final 20 in the last race. Man, I adore this game. At number 2, we have Octopath Traveler 2, and I was not ready for this game to be as good as it is. I played and I liked the first Octopath Traveler. It's a good game, but I wouldn't say it's much more than that. I think the best thing that game did was give us HD 2D, which has led to Live Alive and the Dragon Quest III remake, and I kinda thought HD 2D had outgrown Octopath Traveler. But when I finally played Octopath Traveler 2, my eyes just widened. This is one of the finest turn-based RPGs I have ever played in my entire life. It takes everything that Octopath 1 did well, skims off all the stuff it didn't do well, and then just shines everything that's still remaining to the shiniest gleam it could possibly be. Not only are the individual stories much better, but they finally interact and intersect. The combat's even better, the visuals are even better, the soundtrack, which was already great, is even better. This was a year of many good RPGs, but Octopath Traveler 2, a pretty traditional turn-based one, is outright the best. Sometimes all you need is just to work with what you know. And at number 1, I swear I wanted to be a bit more unpredictable, but it's The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I will say, this game has not had the impact of Breath of the Wild. When that game came out, it redefined open worlds, it justified the whole Switch platform, and with Tears of the Kingdom, it didn't come and go, but it didn't change the industry. I don't think about it to the same extent I did Breath of the Wild. With that said, whenever I play this game, I am in utter awe of how it all comes together. Every single one of Link's abilities could be their own game. Of course, there's the crafting element, but that's not even touching the surface of why this game is so special. Going through walls shouldn't work. You shouldn't be able to take this giant open world and just be able to go through any wall you want without any problems ever occurring. But it always works. The game shouldn't be able to track the history of every object on the screen, but it can. You can move anything, and it will remember and reverse time to exactly where that was. It is such a clever thing. And with the world still being there from Breath of the Wild, it essentially gives us a game that was in development for like 10 years. There's an underground, there's the actual overworld, there's the sky, and they all work in tandem with each other. Sometimes in the sky you'll find a map leading to the depths, so you go down to the depths and you find some armor. There's all these brand new caves in Hyrule, changing how you move around the world. And I think the biggest thing is while there are still horses you can ride on, and of course you can still scale mountains just by climbing them, that kinda isn't the point of the game. Tears of the Kingdom, even more than Breath of the Wild, is about improvisation. It's about using what you have in your inventory to make these stupid contraptions. There was a really high island in the sky, and the way I got to it was making a 2-stage rocket. When you put these outrageous contraptions together, it's just so satisfying when they work. I know a lot of the players rely on machines like this to get around, but I think that kinda makes the game worse doing that. Tears of the Kingdom shines when you're making your own vehicles that look just stupid, but they work. And some players are able to make just the most godly things in the world, like Godzilla. Is Tears of the Kingdom the most influential game of the year? Honestly, probably not. But every single time I sit down and play it, I'm convinced this might be my favorite game. Just period. That is a lot of quality video games just for one dang year. And it's not slowing down. We've got another Code, and Prince of Persia, and Princess Peach, and Paper Mario, and so many other games coming in just a few months. But 2023 was such a great year, not just for the Switch, but gaming in general. And over the coming weeks, we're going to be ranking our overall favorite games of 2023. Not just me, but Brandon, and Daniel, and Steve, and Ash, and Derek. We're all going to be ranking our favorite games, so stay tuned for that. And thank you for watching this entire video. Do you agree with my ranking of the best Switch stuff? Did I miss anything major? Let me know down below. And we will catch you next time. Bye everyone. Hey, thanks for watching all the way through. I will say, while editing this, it became very clear to me that this is not one of gaming's best years. So just to dedicate this section here to all the developers that were laid off this year. Great year for games, bad year for those who make them.